And Frank Reich is the new head coach of the Carolina Panthers. There's a Carolina Panthers connection there. He was their first quarterback for the Carolina Panthers back in 1995. I'm sure by now you've all seen that photo of him holding up his Frank Reich jersey with, I don't even know, it was like in a basement of someplace back in 1995 or whatever that was. But regardless, the news of the day is that the Carolina Panthers have gone with Frank Reich. Unleashed are the takes. So he was with Philadelphia, part of that Super Bowl run. He ends up in Indianapolis as the head coach. Andrew Luck retires. He falls in love, or has been in love, with Carson Wentz, so he brings him over. That experiment fails, and then they went through a string of QBs, young and old, and he ends up getting fired by Jim Irsay, Colts owner, 5 games in the season, or however many games that was in the season, to elevate Jeff Saturday, of all things, to the interim coach out of nowhere, plucked him out of an ESPN booth. So there's a lot of context, Giglio, to why things did not work out in Indianapolis. There's a lot of context as to why Frank Reich, an offensive-minded guy, but an older coach who's been around the block, is the decision that Tepper would go with because the Panthers have never had an offensive-minded coach, unless you want to go all the way back to like the George Seifert days, but that didn't really work out. So there's a lot of context as to why this makes sense. But, man, there's a lot of people that were hoping and understood and felt it was justified to hire Steve Wilkes, who went 6-6 as an interim head coach for the Panthers.
What you earn and what you get are two different things.
Yep.
Lesson in life there. I'm sure one that Steve Wilkes was already well aware of. I don't know if I would say Frank Reich was a success with the Colts. He was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't qualify that. 10-6, 7-9, 11-5, 9-8. Fired 8 games into this season, and there's a different quarterback. He had a different quarterback every year. He had an elderly Phillip Rivers. He had an elderly Matt Ryan. He had what he wanted in Carson Wentz, but couldn't rekindle that old magic. And he had 1 year with Andrew Luck. Luck retires. So that's not the job you thought you walked
It's
into.
not. No.
So I think he did remarkable work. They made the playoffs 2 of those, 2 of his first 4 years. And last year when they missed the playoffs, they were one of the most dangerous teams in the AFC last year, and they end up losing the wrong game because Wentz, quite frankly, wasn't good in Week 17.
The Wentz portion of this is the one. It would be the one concern that I have for whoever the next coach of the Carolina Panthers was going to be. I think what Steve Wilkes proved is that, and this is something that you've been banging the table throughout this season, and you've used Brian Dable as an example of this with the Giants, and he's not the only one. There's countless examples of this. Look at Doug Peterson, right? A good coach, circumstances in Philadelphia went a little wiry there at the end. Ownership gets involved. Who's your quarterback going to be? Everything else. But you see where a good coach can come in and take a team that has talent to the playoffs. All right. And I think that's where the Carolina Panthers are. They almost won the division. A terrible division, but they almost did it with their hands tied behind their back through a variety of decisions being made that looked like a team that wasn't interested in winning, especially when it comes to trading away Christian McCaffrey, who's now with the San Francisco 49ers and a game away from making it to the Super Bowl. And there was attrition in the coaching ranks as well, whether it was guys leaving for other gigs or guys that Steve Wilkes actually got out of there in the Matt Rule exodus, okay? But the Panthers showed you under Steve Wilkes going 6-6 is that there's a good core there. There's a lot to work with. It's a team that can win, but there's one position they absolutely have to get right in the next coming years, and that would be the obvious one, the quarterback position, which gets me back to Frank Reich. Sometimes coaches can get really enamored with a guy, and I can fix him. I can fix this guy. He had a bad situation played out. Injuries have besieged him. He's going to be healthy here. It's all going to work out. Obviously, that wasn't the case. He bet on Carson Wentz. Him and Chris Ballard bet on Carson Wentz. That did not cash in. But I'll give Frank Reich credit here. They understood in Indianapolis that he was not the answer, so they went ahead and they moved on. So maybe that's the lesson learned, that they're not going to find themselves enamored with somebody, and they'll truly approach the next quarterback in Carolina with an open mind, whether it comes to the draft or somebody like you and I have talked about this, Derek Carr, who's not going to be coming back to the Las Vegas Raiders, who I think is clearly an upgrade over what they've had, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and P.J. Walker, right? And Matt Corral, I know he's in the system, but I don't see that panning out. So I do believe that Frank Reich has a track record of making the right call on a QB. We'll see if he can actually do it in Carolina.
I think it's a good hire. I also think if you're Steve Wilks, you look at this as a victim of circumstance, because offense has been that is what drives the NFL now.
Yeah.
And getting the quarterback position right, being the right play caller is what drives the NFL now. I don't know what plan Steve Wilks presented to David Tepper in terms of who he would have calling the plays or in terms of how he would approach the quarterback situation. I do think you're right. In this offseason, there are more options available to not only the Panthers, but to a lot of different teams in the quarterback market this offseason. So there is some hope there that if they don't use the 9th pick to get a quarterback, they can at least put themselves in a position to address the situation for the first time since Cam Newton left.
I am completely understanding in the frustration that Panthers fans have that Steve Wilks was not named the head coach. And to your point, Giulio, doing things that get you to deserve the position do not necessarily mean you get what you deserve, okay? And you can justify it all you want. That's still not going to take away the sting that people feel today, and I understand why. The sting that people feel today that Steve Wilks was not named the head coach. I would have been fine with it. I think Steve Wilks is savvy enough to understand what is necessary to have won that job and come up with an offensive plan, but Tepper probably had his mind made up anyway that he wanted to go in a different direction and actually hire an offensive-minded coach. That's been the one thing that has rung true throughout this entire process ever since Matt Rule got fired. The idea that he was going to go offensive-minded and he was going to go with a veteran head coach too, because if there's one consistency with NFL ownership, if you want to get an idea of where they're going to go after the coach they've fired, just look in the opposite direction. It's not all that different from college, right? I mean, we can use examples here in the triangle for how they've gone about replacing the guys that they just fired, right? So we'll use NC State as an example, right? Mike O'Kane. Why did I say Tom O'Kane? I'm like combining guys now. What's wrong with me? So,
like Frank Herbert,
Mike O'Kane, the head coach of the Wolfpack, was kicked out for the. I know you're completely losing. For the personality and the recruiting of Chuck Amato, right? This guy was bringing a brand. And then at the end of the Chuck Amato era, even though he tried to get away from that behavior, the flashiness and things like that, the sunglasses and the boots and everything else, they bring in Tom O'Brien, who was the complete opposite of Chuck Amato. And then they bring in Dave Doran to replace, I got that name right. They replace Dave Doran they replace Tom O'Brien with Dave Doran, who was younger and recruiting minded and, at the time was positioned as a guy with more of a personality. So it makes sense that you get this with the Panthers as well. They're going in the opposite direction of Matt Rule, and they end up with a veteran head coach, former head coach, with a track record with quarterbacks to turn things around. But again, the Wilks portion of this is not resolved with today's news. In fact, the law firm that represents Brian Flores, who brought a lawsuit to the NFL for their hiring practices, tweeted this out upon the news that Frank Reich was getting the job. Quote, "We are shocked and disturbed that after the incredible job Coach Wilks did as the interim coach, including bringing the team back into the playoffs, or at least back into playoff contention, and garnering the support of the players and fans, that he was passed over for the head coach position by David Tepper. There is a legitimate race problem in the NFL, and we can assure you that we will have more to say in the coming days." I do think that this law firm is waiting to see how the rest of the hiring cycle plays out. I guarantee you that Steve Wilks and Brian Flores are probably texting each other going, "Come on, Jim Irsay, do it. Hire Jeff Saturday. Come on. Come on. You know you want to. I know the fans don't want it, but come on, Jim, do it." Because they're sitting here taking notes going, "Oh, all right. So this interim coach failed, but he gets the job. I actually succeeded, and I don't get the job. Huh, that's kind of funny. What's the difference?" So this is an unresolved portion of the coaching search for the Panthers, and I'll be curious, Giulio, to see how David Tepper handles that when he meets with the media, if he does, in the introduction of Frank Reich as head
He's
coach.
just so polished. I can't wait. You know it's going to be a sterling answer.
That's going to be good. That's going to be good.